I think the second piece, and this is the most important part, and this is what I think troubles Trump more than anything else. The loss of control over the flow of oil, the destruction of the global energy complex, those things are important. But to Donald Trump personally and to his inner circle, what's at stake right now is the survival of American military, political, and economic hegemony. That's what it's all about. You'll recall all these silly remarks about the rules-based liberal international order. Well, that thing was concocted in the aftermath of Bretton Woods and the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, the instrumentalities that were supposed to be helpful and good for people in the world, and people bought that for a while, and they finally realized, as Charles de Gaulle predicted, that everything that was being developed was really a Trojan horse for American hegemonic power. Well, that's true. And what has happened over the last 30 years, as the Russians have noted and others, is that this hegemonic power expanded. And it's reached a point of intolerability. In other words, people just won't tolerate it anymore. And the acid test for this military hegemony has been Iran. And the United States Armed Forces thus far have lost. And so for all intents and purposes, the world has concluded that the world they lived in of American military, political, and economic hegemony is over.
The guest argues that the conflict with Iran has become much more than a regional military confrontation. In his view, it's now a test of America's global influence and whether decades of U.S. leadership can still be maintained. That's a controversial assessment, but it sets the stage for everything else he's about to discuss, from military strategy to energy markets and the global economy.
Well, I think we can conclude that a couple of things are underway, one of which is this is a regional war now. This is no longer limited to Israel and Iran and the United States. It has spilled over into, as you point out, Iraq. The Popular Mobilization Forces there, the PMF, are very loyal to the Iranians that stood by them through the Civil War and virtually from the beginning of our intervention and occupation. They have their eyes on Kuwait, frankly. I think Kuwait will cease to exist when this war ends. It'll become part of Iraq. I also think that this war is spreading even to places that we're not paying attention to. There was a refinery in Egypt that was badly damaged by an unmanned system. We're not quite sure where it came from. That could have come from Iraq or any number of places. Could have come from the Houthis. Al-Ansara is now in control of the access to the Red Sea. Iran controls access to the Persian Gulf. This basically is a clear and unambiguous message that the United States Navy no longer controls either of those, and for that matter, is no longer the dominant force they claim to be. I think the second piece, and this is the most important part, and this is what I think troubles Trump more than anything else.
One of the biggest themes here is escalation. MacGregor believes the conflict is expanding beyond Israel and Iran, with growing implications for shipping routes, energy supplies, and regional alliances. Whether or not that scenario unfolds exactly as he predicts, the broader concern is that local conflicts can have global economic consequences.
But we're now beginning to see the emergence of a new axis. We talk about these axes all the time. Well, there's only one axis in the West and the Middle East. That's the Israeli-American axis. But when you look east, you have a growing axis that I would say consists of Russia, China, Iran, and I would add Turkey. Because even though the Turks have not yet engaged, they are on the very edge of doing so. And the population there is overwhelmingly in support of striking back against this Israeli-American axis in the Middle East. I think Erdogan has waited as long as he possibly can and will continue to wait, but he wants to be in on the end. It's sort of like the Battle of Waterloo, which was largely a German affair with a few British troops, contrary to popular belief. Prussians, Hanoverians, and Germans from everywhere. And of course, the British, and then suddenly at the end, imagine the Austrians and the Russians and others showing up. Well, I think that will be Turkey at the end of this thing. Because Iran had to do two things. The first was survive. It's done that. It's demonstrated it cannot be destroyed. And it's going to continue to attack because the second goal for Iran, having survived, and they weren't sure that they would. They spent 20, 30 years preparing, but they were never completely sure. Now they know they're going to survive, is to drive the American military presence completely out of the region. And that's going to happen because we can't protect our own bases, let alone any of our partners. So that's going to be achieved. And at that point, this new axis that I just described is going to dominate. It's going to dominate the Middle East. It's going to dominate Eastern Europe, perhaps Western Europe, because people in Western Europe are looking at this and saying, well, why should we sign up for the United States? It's no longer the leading economic power. It no longer has the same political influence. Financially, it's brought us to ruin. We're part of this Western scam, recirculate all the dollars back through New York City, fund our massive debt so that we can continue to live well. Europeans are saying, what are we doing this for? And then finally, there's the military dimension. Europeans are beginning to question their governments because they're unsure about this Russian threat. And they should be unsure about it because it's not real, as we know. But I guess the possibility that you could end up in a nuclear confrontation with China, Pakistan, and Russia, let alone a confrontation that would also include Turkey and Iran, these things don't seem to really enter into discussion in the White House.
This is one of the interview's boldest claims. MacGregor argues that Russia, China, Iran, and potentially Turkey are becoming more closely aligned as Western influence weakens. That remains a debated geopolitical question, but his larger point is that global power may be shifting toward a more multipolar world rather than remaining dominated by a single superpower.
Well, there's a yawning gap between reality and fantasy in Wall Street. Wall Street is accustomed to manipulation. Remember, everything is financialized for Wall Street. You don't have people in Wall Street who've ever been to drilling rigs. You don't have people in Wall Street who have visited any refineries. If you ask one of them, how many refineries do we have today? How many refineries did we have 30 years ago? They have no idea. They don't see a problem. And the White House, thanks to the leadership of Trump and his inner circle of advisors, has been very effective at manipulating oil prices. But we know, for instance, that the cost of oil coming off a ship right now is about $140 a barrel. But that's not the paper price. This is all going to change. In other words, what you have right now, what's the right word? We talk about latency in communications of the military. That, as a result of the structure of your communications, orders or information or intelligence take time to arrive at a location. It's not instantaneous. Well, that's what you're dealing with right now in the oil market. So if you listen to Jeff Curry or somebody like Pilkington and others who have years of experience in the oil industry, they're all saying the same thing. Yeah, you're right. The reality hasn't caught up yet, but it will. And when it catches up this time around, it's going to be awful. Weeks ago we said, well, if President Trump steps out of this or puts an end to it, there's a chance we could get out of this with minimal damage. Two or 3 years, we could return to normalcy. But where we're headed right now, it'll be a decade or more. And everything is going to change. I mean, when you listen to the Iranians and others in the Middle East who are fundamentally opposed to us and Israel, they all say the same thing. Sykes-Picot is over. In other words, the structures of the past that were formulated at the end of the First World War are going away. We're going to live in a new Middle East, and it's not going to be one dominated. It's not going to be the Greater Israel Project. It's not going to be the United States. It's going to be indigenous. And the two great powers that are going to shape these things and decide these things are not the United States and Israel. They're primarily Iranians and Turks because they live there, but also Chinese and Russians, the Chinese especially, because they're the only country in the world that can help rebuild anything. We're broke. We're on the edge of a total financial meltdown. It's like a lot of things. You and I stand at the railroad crossing and we look out and we say, see, look over there. The train is coming. The locomotive is coming. And everybody says, oh, yeah, you've been saying that for the last 6 hours. Hasn't gotten here yet. Yeah, but we can see it now. It's visible. It's coming. Yeah, right. Fine, fine. Yeah, wake me when it arrives. Well, it's going to arrive, Glenn. So, you can replay this at some point in the future. And the people that all said, oh, I'm crazy, Curry's crazy, all these other experts are crazy, all these other military analysts are crazy, replay it. And everybody will reel in shock. Well, why didn't we do something?
The conversation now moves from geopolitics to economics. MacGregor believes financial markets are underestimating the long-term effects of ongoing conflict on energy supplies. His argument is that if energy costs remain elevated or supply chains become more disrupted, those pressures could eventually reach consumers, businesses, and the broader economy.
Well, the man who has to do something is named Donald Trump. And it's not a question of what he's doing, it's a question of what he's failing to do. He's just decided not to decide. And that's why you get this vacillation every other day. I'm going to destroy them. I'll hit every bridge. Okay. What difference does that make? What are you going to do? Destroy every hospital? What's your plan? What targets are going to be so important? Are you going to, we're going to seize Carg Island. Oh, that'll be good. Great. Yeah. What are all those soldiers on Carg Island going to do as they sit under constant bombardment from the Iranians? It'll be an exercise in suicide and certain death. Okay. Well, then we'll destroy Carg Island. Okay. Now what? There's no sense of this whole thing makes no sense. And the intelligent thing to do is to stop it. There's not going to be a public surrender by us or by Iran. He's just going to have to disengage. And he will. He'll disengage. But not until the 11th hour and not until it's too late. And only when the economy here at home is awful and is really profoundly affecting everyone in Washington. That's coming. It's absolutely certainly coming. So I don't know what to tell you, except that President Trump does not fully appreciate the limits of American air and naval power. He never understood that our military power was always structured for relatively short campaigns against opponents like Afghanistan's, Iraq, Syria, Africa, people without air and missile defenses, let alone operational strike capabilities in the form of ballistic missiles. So, in addition, we have to operate at a very long logistical support system, and that's very fragile. And that's one of the reasons we're in a pause right now. So this is not a new problem. We've been dealing with this, contrary to popular belief, since the Bush administration in 2001. But that's where we are. And Trump has never understood it, and he's now going to pay a terrible price for it.
Rather than focusing only on military operations, MacGregor argues that strategic indecision is itself becoming a major risk. His criticism centers on leadership and timing, suggesting that delaying difficult decisions can allow both geopolitical tensions and economic pressures to build over time. Whether viewers agree or disagree, this is a central theme running throughout the interview.
Well, I sat in a discussion the other day with some very bright people talking about AI. And they were talking, these are people involved in the technology, not people selling stock. And they were talking about the bubble that's about to burst. And they pointed out nobody seems to understand that AI consumes enormous energy. Where's the energy coming from? And if you want to build, you have to have credit. You've got to be able to borrow. Well, cheap credit and cheap energy are inseparable. And those two things have been the foundation for our economic expansion on the North American continent, I would argue, for over 100 years. So where do we go when we don't have it? When energy isn't cheap and credit isn't cheap, everything stops. We have to start over. So I think that's coming. Timeline, I think we'll know by Christmas. We'll see a lot of these things come to fruition this fall. And from that point onward, it's just going to get worse for a while. And people are going to vote in new prime ministers, new presidents, new governments, and they're not going to get anywhere because they don't know what they're doing. And suddenly there's going to be a demand for competence. Now, I don't know how you vote in Norway, what people look for, but in the United States, it's a popularity contest. You know, why'd you vote for Bill Clinton? Oh, I think he's a really nice guy. He understands. Well, why'd you vote for Donald Trump? Well, he says stuff I agree with. You know, he just says it out loud. Why'd you vote for Obama? Well, he seemed like a nice guy, easygoing, somebody I could talk to. I mean, I could go on and on, all right? I sat with people that met with Hitler, and I'd said, you know, what was it about the man? And everybody said the same thing. Oh, that was a man you could talk to. Okay, great. But at some point, competence is critical. You've got to have people that know what the hell they're doing. And you've got to have people that are going to enforce the law. Because one of the things that's relaxed across the Western world is law. We let people get away with all sorts of things that our ancestors 100 years ago would have hanged them for. You know? So we got a long way to go. It's going to take us years to recover. But by this fall, it's going to be pretty obvious where we are. And there's no easy fix. You're not going to manipulate your way out of it. You know, look, the strategic petroleum reserves, they're drying up. There are people very upset with Trump. They're afraid that they're going to be dried up to the point where we can no longer use them, especially these underground salt mines. I don't know. I'm not in there. I don't have access to that information. But I hear these things all the time. We start talking about microcircuitry and the requirements for the microchips that we desperately need, not just for the military, to run our entire economy. Then you look at the power grids that we've neglected for years. We could go on and on. All of these things are suddenly going to become very, very important. And as I said, then nobody will care what happens overseas.
The interview ultimately shifts away from the battlefield and toward everyday economic realities. MacGregor argues that issues like debt, energy costs, infrastructure, and long-term economic stability may become more important to voters than overseas conflicts. His conclusion is that domestic challenges, not foreign wars alone, could ultimately shape the next chapter of American politics. Whether these predictions prove accurate or not, the interview raises important questions about the relationship between geopolitics, energy, and the economy. MacGregor presents a pessimistic outlook, arguing that today's conflicts could accelerate broader global changes. Those are his views, and they're debated by many analysts. Ultimately, the future will depend on decisions made by governments, developments on the ground, and economic realities that continue to evolve. The key is to follow the evidence, consider multiple perspectives, and stay informed as events unfold.